Hello and welcome to my channel. English is not my native language, so you may hear some mistakes. I'm constantly learning and trying to improve with each video. This is also my first YouTube channel, so I'm learning everything as I go. If you like the content, please subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'm especially interested to hear what you think I can improve, and I'll try to incorporate your suggestions into future videos. Thank you for watching and for being a part of this journey. And so, we return to Circleville, a small town that, by the early 1980s, had been living with anonymous letters for years. By this time, people no longer asked if the letters would continue. They asked who would receive the next letter. What began with a few anonymous messages turned into one of the strangest unsolved mysteries in the history of American criminal investigation. And the deeper investigators delved into the investigation, the stranger the story became. Because the next chapter won't just be about the letters. It's about suspects, a contradiction, and a question that still hasn't been definitively answered. Who was really behind the Circleville letters? The discovery of the package changes the case completely. Until this point, investigators had been dealing with letters, threats, rumors, psychological pressure. Now they were facing something different, something tangible. Authorities viewed the package as a major escalation. Whoever was responsible had moved beyond anonymous messages. The situation was becoming more serious. And for investigators, that raised new questions. What kind of person keeps a campaign of anonymous letters going for years? What kind of person remains hidden for that long? By this point, detectives had begun forming a profile. Someone patient, someone methodical, someone familiar with the people involved. Someone who seemed to understand how to avoid drawing attention. But the package introduced another possibility. Was the person behind the letters acting alone? Or was someone else involved? One individual, two individuals, or a connection investigators hadn't yet discovered. To this day, people who study the case continue to disagree. Some believe everything points to a single author. Others believe the story may be more complicated than that. And from this point forward, the mystery only becomes harder to explain. As the years pass, the investigation begins to narrow its focus. Not because detectives suddenly discover a confession, not because new physical evidence appears, but because of a simple question. Who could have known so much? The letters contained personal details, private details, information that appeared to come from inside the community itself. To many investigators, that suggested something important. The author was probably not a stranger passing through town. The author appeared familiar with local people, local relationships, local rumors. Someone who observed, listened, and paid attention. Eventually, attention turned toward Paul Freshour. His name began appearing more frequently in discussions surrounding the case, partly because of family connections, partly because of known disagreements involving people mentioned in the letters. From an investigative standpoint, some believed there could be a possible motive. If the letters were intended to damage reputations, perhaps the author had a personal reason for doing so. At first glance, it seemed like a plausible direction. But there was a problem. A significant one. Suspicion is not proof. A motive is not proof. And theories are not evidence. The deeper investigators looked, the more complicated the picture became. Because the facts didn't fit together as neatly as they first appeared. As the investigation continues, detectives begin looking for clues in places most people would never think to search. Not fingerprints, not DNA, not eyewitnesses. Language. Most of the letters were typed. That made traditional handwriting comparisons difficult. But investigators and outside specialists still examined every available detail. Occasional handwritten markings, word choices, sentence structure, repeated phrases. The idea was simple. Even when people hide their identity, they sometimes leave traces of themselves in the way they communicate. Over time, one opinion began to circulate among some analysts who reviewed the material. The possibility that the letters may not have been written by the kind of person investigators initially imagined. Some suggested the writing style appeared more consistent with a female author. Others argued that any experienced letter writer could intentionally create that impression. And that's the problem. The interpretation itself became part of the mystery. Was the writer revealing something about themselves, or hiding behind a carefully constructed identity? Nobody could answer that question with certainty. But the discussion had an important effect. It challenged assumptions. Investigators could no longer focus on a single profile. The list of possibilities widened. And once that happened, the case became even harder to solve. Because now, investigators weren't just looking for a person. They were trying to figure out who that person was pretending to be. As the investigation continued, attention occasionally returned to an uncomfortable question. Not about the letters themselves, but about how people responded to them. Over the years, some observers pointed to aspects of Mary Gillespie's behavior that they found unusual. For example, she did not immediately go to the police when the letters first appeared, and according to some accounts discussed later in the case, she occasionally seemed aware of information contained in certain letters before others expected her to be. Now, it's important to be careful here. None of these observations prove wrongdoing. People react differently to harassment, differently to fear, differently to public scrutiny. But in a mystery this complex, almost every unusual detail eventually becomes part of the discussion. As a result, some theories emerged suggesting that Mary may have known more about the situation than investigators initially understood. Others argued that she was simply one of the people most deeply affected by the letters, and that years of speculation had unfairly placed her under suspicion. Investigators reviewed many possibilities throughout the case, but one fact remained unchanged. No formal charges were ever filed against Mary Gillespie in connection with writing the letters. No court ever concluded that she was responsible. And that leaves us in a familiar place: questions, possibilities, and uncertainty. The three things that seem to follow almost every chapter of the Circleville mystery. So after years of letters, after investigations, suspects, and theories, what do we actually know about the person behind them? Only a few things. First, persistence. The letters continued for years, not weeks, not months, years. Whatever the author's motive was, it wasn't temporary. Second, knowledge. Many of the letters contained information that appeared connected to the personal lives of local residents. That suggests access, observation, or involvement in the community itself. Third, adaptability. At various points, the letters reportedly became less frequent when attention intensified. Then they returned. Whoever was responsible appeared aware of the environment around them. And finally, escalation. Over time, the situation grew more serious. What began as anonymous correspondence evolved into something far more alarming. And that leaves us with a difficult question. What kind of person could maintain something like this for so long? Investigators, journalists, and independent researchers have offered different answers over the years. Some believed the author acted out of resentment. Others suspected obsession. Others thought the motivation might have been far more personal. The truth is, we don't know. And that's important, because a profile is not an identity. A theory is not proof. And after all these years, the author remains exactly what they wanted to be from the beginning. Anonymous. Eventually, the investigation begins to move beyond theories. Not because someone confesses, not because a witness suddenly comes forward, but because investigators start examining the physical evidence more closely. Envelopes, paper, postmarks, typed documents. Every detail is analyzed. Every possible connection is reviewed. Over time, attention begins to focus on a smaller group of individuals connected to the case. Among the names discussed by investigators, one continues to appear: Paul Freshour. By this stage, investigators were no longer looking only at the letters themselves. They were also examining events that had occurred during the broader investigation. Then, in 1994, Freshour is arrested. Importantly, the case against him was not simply about anonymous letters. It centered on specific allegations connected to a dangerous device discovered during the investigation. The case goes to court. A conviction follows, and a prison sentence is imposed. For many people, this looked like the end of the mystery. The suspect had been identified. The case had an answer. But there was one problem. Freshour maintained his innocence. From the moment of his arrest, through the trial, and for the rest of his life, he consistently denied being the author of the letters. And that denial would become one of the reasons the case remained controversial for decades. Because even after a conviction, many of the questions were still unanswered. Here's a detail that continues to generate debate among people who study this case. Over the years, hundreds of letters were attributed to the Circleville writer. They were written across a long period of time, different years, different circumstances, different targets. And because of that, some independent researchers began asking an interesting question. Did all of the letters really come from the same person? Some observers believed they noticed subtle differences in tone, differences in phrasing, differences in the way certain messages were written. Now, it's important to be careful here. Those observations were never enough to conclusively prove multiple authors. Writing styles can change over time. People adapt. Their language evolves, especially across a span of many years. But the question never completely disappeared. Could more than one person have been involved? Could someone else have contributed at certain points? Or was there always a single author behind everything? The official investigation never publicly established multiple letter writers, nor did it provide definitive proof that only one person was responsible for every letter. And that's one reason this theory continues to survive, because it offers a possible explanation for one of the strangest aspects of the case: reports that letters continued to appear even after key developments in the investigation. Does that prove multiple authors? No. But it does leave room for questions. And questions are something the Circleville mystery has never run out of. Let's step back for a moment and look at the entire story from the beginning. 1976. The letters begin. Mary Gillespie becomes one of their primary targets. Anonymous accusations, threats, secrets. Then, 1977. Ron Gillespie dies in a car crash. Officially, an accident, but questions about the timing would remain part of the discussion for years. 1976 through 1983. The letters continue, year after year, without a confirmed author. Then, 1983, a package connected to the broader mystery is discovered. Authorities view the incident as a major escalation. The case is no longer just about anonymous correspondence. Years later, 1994, Paul Freshour is convicted in connection with part of the case. Many people believe the mystery has finally been solved. But controversy remains. Questions remain. Because reports of additional letters continue to fuel debate. And debate is something this case has never lacked. 1998. Freshour dies, still maintaining his innocence. And today, decades later, the Circleville letters mystery continues to attract researchers, journalists, and true crime enthusiasts. Because despite all the theories, all the suspects, all the investigations, one question remains. Who was really behind the letters? And if that question has never been fully answered, then the possibility remains that someone carried that secret to the grave. Or perhaps, someone never revealed it at all. And here we will stop the story. The second part of the Circleville letters mystery. By this point, we've already seen the anonymous letters, a suspicious death, years of investigation, the verdict, and more questions than answers. So let me ask you something. Who do you think was behind these letters? One person? More than one? Someone close to the victims? Or someone the investigation never seriously considered? Leave your theory in the comments. And if you liked the video, please subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss Part 3. We'll explore the final theories, remaining controversies, and the question that still divides researchers. Who really wrote the letters in Circleville? Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.